A millionaire is convicted, but inconsistent evidence emerges. A detail in the evidence changes the course of the case. The judge discovers something not found in the official records. An investigation reveals unexpected connections in the courtroom. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. On the penthouse of the tallest building in New York City, Richard Montague observed the city he had helped build over 3 decades. His brown eyes, slightly marked by age, reflected the lights of the skyscrapers stretching to the horizon. At 62, the businessman's face bore the marks of a lifetime dedicated to business, but he maintained the elegant posture that made him well known in the most exclusive circles of New York society. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant, Megan Sanders, her voice trembling. "Mr. Montague, you need to see the news right now. It's on all the websites." Richard picked up the tablet on the black marble table. The headline of the country's major newspaper made his heart race. Magnate Richard Montague accused of leading scheme that led companies to bankruptcy. Below, a photo of him leaving a board meeting taken just 3 days ago. "This is absurd," he muttered, as he quickly read the paragraphs detailing alleged evidence against him. Documents, recordings, witnesses, everything seemed meticulously organized to destroy his reputation. That same morning, a few miles away, Judge Hannah Carter reviewed the case in her chambers at the courthouse. At 45, she had built a solid career based on technical decisions and an unshakable reputation for integrity. Her black hair, tied in a severe bun, and discreet framed glasses composed the austere figure well known in the corridors of the court. "Judge Carter," her clerk called from the door. "The press is all outside. They want a statement about the Montague case." Hannah adjusted her glasses without taking her eyes off the documents. "There's no statement to make. The evidence speaks for itself." In another part of the city, at the newsroom of the Truth newspaper, Beth Anderson reread for the 10th time the report she had written about the case. The investigative journalist, known for her relentless persistence, felt something strange in the lines of the allegations she had received. At 35, she had already brought down powerful figures with her articles, but something about this case bothered her. "Are you doubting your own sources now, Beth?" asked Charles, her editor-in-chief, approaching her desk. "It's not that, Charles," she replied, running a hand through her curly hair. "It's just some things don't add up. For example, this main recording, the one that supposedly shows Montague arranging the bankruptcies. Why did it only appear now?" In the office of District Attorney Philip Mendoza, the atmosphere was one of contained victory. The 50-year-old man, known for his obsession with pursuing big businessmen, organized the next steps of the process. His impeccable suit and calculated smile hid well the anxiety he felt. "It's a solid case," he told his team. "Montague has no way out this time." Back at the penthouse, Richard received his younger brother, Alex Montague. The resemblance between them was remarkable, but while Richard maintained the posture of a natural leader, Alex had always seemed uncomfortable with the spotlight the family attracted. "We need to act fast, Richard," Alex said, restless. "You know they won't stop here." Richard observed his brother carefully. Something in his nervous behavior intrigued him, but there were more urgent concerns at the moment. "Alex, I need you to contact all our allies. Someone is trying to destroy me, and we need to find out who it is." The sun was beginning to set over New York City, painting the sky in orange hues. In Judge Carter's chambers, the most difficult decision of her career was about to be made. The evidence seemed irrefutable: signed documents, consistent testimonies, compromising recordings. Her duty was clear. "Prepare the warrant," she told her clerk. "Richard Montague must answer for what he did." As night fell over the city, 4 people in different parts of New York couldn't sleep. A judge who believed she was serving justice, a businessman who saw his empire crumbling, a journalist who was beginning to doubt her own discoveries, and a prosecutor who was hiding more than he revealed. The truth, like a rough diamond, had many facets, and some of them still remained in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to shine. The news of Richard Montague's arrest exploded like a bomb in the morning news. Images of the businessman leaving his penthouse, escorted by court officers, circulated on all channels. His face, normally serene, maintained a silent dignity that intrigued more attentive viewers. In the newsroom, Beth Anderson watched the images with a knot in her stomach. Something in Montague's expression didn't match the profile she had drawn of him during months of investigation. Her sources were reliable, the documents seemed authentic, but an insistent voice in her mind warned her that she was missing something important. "I need to review the recordings," she murmured to herself, opening the audio files on her computer. The voices were clear, Montague discussing strategies that would lead smaller companies to bankruptcy. However, listening for the 10th time, a detail caught her attention. "Charles," she called her editor, "do you notice something strange in this section at 2 minutes and 15 seconds? The editor approached, adjusting his headphones. After a few moments, his face frowned in concentration. "There's a kind of cut. Very subtle, but it's there." At the courthouse, Hannah Carter faced her own battle. The media acclaimed her as a heroine, the judge who wasn't intimidated by economic power. But as she organized the case documents, her hands stopped over a crucial testimony. "Mr. Paul," she called her trusted clerk, "that main witness, the former CFO of Montague Enterprises, can you locate him? I need to clarify some points." After a few hours, her clerk returned with a worried expression. "Your Honor, it's very strange. No one has been able to contact him for 3 days. His cell phone is off and his apartment seems empty. In District Attorney Philip Mendoza's office, the atmosphere was one of contained celebration. His team toasted with coffee what they called the biggest victory of the decade against corporate corruption. Mendoza, however, seemed restless. "Sir," his assistant called, "you don't seem satisfied with the result." "Satisfaction is for amateurs, Maria," he replied dryly. "We still have a lot of work ahead." On his phone, a message disturbed him. "We need to talk. Things didn't go exactly as planned." AM. Alex Montague paced nervously in his luxury apartment in Tribeca. News about his brother occupied all the screens of his smart TV. His hands trembled slightly as he poured himself another drink. The intercom rang, startling him. On the monitor, he recognized Beth Anderson. "How did she find me?" he muttered, hesitating before authorizing her to come up. The journalist entered the apartment with determination stamped on her face. "Mr. Montague, we need to talk about some inconsistencies I found in the evidence against your brother." Alex felt his blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've already given all the necessary statements to the press, including about the meeting you had with DA Mendoza 2 weeks before the allegations came to light." The glass in his hands almost fell. "How did you—" "I have my sources," Beth cut him off, "and now I want the truth." In the courtroom, Hannah Carter received a preliminary report from a company specialized in audio analysis. The document highlighted possible manipulations in the main recordings of the case. "This can't be right," she murmured, rereading the report for the 3rd time. The entire case was built on this evidence. Her cell phone vibrated with a message. "Judge Carter, we need to talk urgently about the Montague case. I have information that could change everything. Beth Anderson, The Truth newspaper." The judge observed the message for long moments. Her entire career had been built on careful, technical decisions. She had never met with journalists during an ongoing process, but something in her judicial instinct, sharpened by years of experience, told her she couldn't ignore this message. In his special cell, Richard Montague made notes in a small notebook. His thoughts wandered to a conversation he had with his brother months ago, when Alex seemed especially nervous about the direction of the family business. "What are you hiding, Alex?" he murmured, as his notes revealed a pattern that was beginning to make sense. And why? The city continued its frantic pace outside, oblivious to the revelations that were beginning to emerge in the shadows of power. The truth, like water finding cracks in a dam, was beginning to leak through small fissures, threatening to turn into an unstoppable torrent. Beth Anderson's office looked more like a giant puzzle. On the walls, photos, documents, and newspaper clippings were connected by colored threads, forming a complex web of information. In the center, an old photo caught attention. District Attorney Philip Mendoza, 15 years younger, next to businessmen at a charity event. "It can't be a coincidence," she murmured, approaching the image. Among the businessmen, she recognized familiar faces, owners of some of the companies that had gone bankrupt in the alleged Montague scheme. But her eyes fixed on a particular detail. In the background of the photo, partially hidden, was Alex Montague, with a tense expression on his young face. Her cell phone vibrated, a message from Judge Hannah Carter. "We can meet." Today, 7 p.m., Old Cafe in Greenwich Village. At the courthouse, Hannah faced her own silent investigation. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her instinct, and something about D.A. Mendoza's behavior deeply bothered her. "Mr. Paul," she called her clerk, "I need D.A. Mendoza's previous cases. All of them, especially those involving corporate bankruptcies in the last 5 years." While waiting for the documents, she received an unexpected visit. Claire Mitchell, a young lawyer from the firm representing Montague, brought with her a thick folder. "Judge Carter, we found something you need to see," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "These are records of bank transfers. All the companies that went bankrupt, they have a connection that no one noticed before." At the specialized police department, an audio expert worked tirelessly on the recordings incriminating Montague. His state-of-the-art software detected patterns invisible to the human ear. "Detective," he called without taking his eyes off the screen, "these recordings, they've been edited. And very well edited, but there are digital markers that don't lie. Someone put together pieces of different conversations." At the luxurious law firm representing Montague, a tense meeting was unfolding. Megan Sanders, Richard's former assistant, handed the lawyers a flash drive. "I've kept this for years," she said, her hands shaking. "Mr. Montague asked me to keep it safe. He said one day it might be necessary. These are records of all attempts to buy the companies that went bankrupt. Legitimate offers, documented well above market value, all suspiciously refused." Alex Montague, in his apartment, received a visit that left him pale. Anna Lewis Barton, former partner of one of the bankrupt companies, brought with her a file that would change everything. "Your brother isn't the monster they're painting him to be, Alex," she said, placing a set of documents on the table. "And you know that better than anyone. The question is, how much longer can you carry this weight?" At the cafe in Greenwich Village, Beth waited for Judge Carter. The place, purposely chosen for its discreet and quiet environment, was perfect for a delicate conversation. Hannah arrived punctually, carrying a discreet folder. Her eyes, normally firm, revealed sleepless nights. "Ms. Anderson," she began, sitting down, "before we start, I need you to understand something. What I'm going to share with you could put at risk more than just my career." Beth nodded discreetly, turning on her recorder. "Judge Carter, have you ever heard of Project Phoenix?" The judge turned pale. That name hadn't been mentioned for years in the corridors of the court. "How did you—" "I found records," Beth continued, "from 2008, a corporate restructuring project that never officially got off the ground. But it has D.A. Mendoza's signature on every page. And you know who else signed? All the businessmen who are now bankrupt." Hannah opened her folder, revealing similar documents. "Ms. Anderson, I think we've discovered just the tip of the iceberg. What's happening with Montague is just one chapter of a much older story." In prison, Richard Montague received a visit from his lawyer, who brought encouraging news. "Mr. Montague, things are changing. The expert analysis found irregularities in the recordings, and a journalist is digging up the past. But there's something you need to know about your brother." Richard raised his hand, interrupting him. "I already know," he said, tired. "I always knew. The question isn't what Alex did, but why he was forced to do it." Outside the cafe, a man observed the meeting between the judge and the journalist, making a discreet call. "They've met," he said. "What do we do now?" On the other end of the line, Philip Mendoza took a deep breath. "Now," he said, "we need to accelerate the process. We can't let them get to the main file. You know what to do." The abandoned office on the 20th floor of a commercial building held more than furniture covered by dusty sheets. Beth Anderson, armed only with a flashlight and her journalistic curiosity, rummaged through old file drawers. The place, former headquarters of one of the bankrupt companies, was practically untouched since its closure. "It has to be here," she murmured, as her agile hands passed through folders yellowed by time. Her heart raced when she found a red folder with the stylized symbol of a phoenix. On the same night, Hannah Carter worked late in her chambers, analyzing the documents that Claire Mitchell had brought. The bank transfers formed an intricate pattern, all converging to shell companies registered in tax havens. "Mr. Paul," she called her clerk, who was also working overtime. "Look at this. All these companies were registered in the same week of 2008, the same week that Project Phoenix was officially archived." In the luxurious Montague apartment, Alex received an unexpected visit. Anna Lewis Barton returned, this time with more than documents. "I found this in my father's belongings," she said, placing an old flash drive on the table. "He kept it as insurance, Alex. He knew one day it would be necessary." Alex connected the device to his laptop, his hands trembling slightly. On the screen, a video from 2008 appeared, a private meeting where Philip Mendoza, much younger, presented Project Phoenix to a select group of businessmen. "The project is simple, gentlemen," Mendoza said in the video, "a complete restructuring of the sector. Those who cooperate will be generously rewarded. Those who resist—" His pause was significant. "Well, accidents happen in the business world." In prison, Richard Montague received a visit from Megan Sanders, his former assistant. She brought with her a personal notebook she had kept since 2008. "Mr. Montague," she began, her voice choked. "Your brother, he had no choice. Mendoza was pressuring him with something from the past. Something related to your father's business." Richard closed his eyes, painful memories returning to the surface. Our father's accident. It was never really clarified, was it? At The Truth newspaper, Beth organized her discoveries. The red folder revealed a complex scheme of market manipulation. Project Phoenix wasn't just a restructuring plan. It was an elaborate strategy to take control of key companies through orchestrated bankruptcies. "Charles," she called her editor, "I need more time before publishing. There's something bigger happening here. The current Montague case is just the tip of the iceberg." Hannah Carter received a surprise visit in her chambers. Anna Lewis Barton. "Your Honor," Anna began, "I came because I can't bear to carry this secret anymore. My father didn't retire in 2008. He was forced to sell the company for a fraction of its value. Project Phoenix wasn't an opportunity. It was a threat." Meanwhile, in DA Mendoza's office, a tense meeting was unfolding. His closest assistant brought worrying news. "Sir, the journalist found the dead file." "And the judge? She's connecting the dots. What do we do?" Mendoza remained silent for a moment, observing the city through his office window. "There's one last card up our sleeve," he finally said. "Something that not even Alex Montague knows we possess." In his apartment, Alex received a call that made him freeze. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the tone was different. "I know you showed the video to Anna Lewis," the voice said. "Very reckless of you. Perhaps it's time to remember why you agreed to participate in our agreement in the first place." Beth, analyzing the material found, came across a photo that made her catch her breath. In it, a young Alex Montague shook hands with Philip Mendoza, while in the background, partially visible, there was a computer screen with information that appeared to be bank records. Judge Hannah, in her chambers, received another technical report on the recordings. This time, something caught her attention. The creation dates of the audio files were prior to the supposed meetings they recorded. "Impossible," she murmured. "Unless—" Her phone rang. It was Beth Anderson. "Judge Carter," said the journalist, "I think you need to see this. It's about the Phoenix Project." "I'll be right there," Elizabeth Carter replied, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. 15 minutes later, she was in Beth's small apartment in downtown Chicago. The journalist's living room looked like a war room with papers, photos, and sticky notes covering every available surface. "Look at this," Beth said, pointing to a photo on her laptop screen. "This was taken at a charity gala in 2008. See anyone familiar?" Elizabeth leaned in, her eyes widening as she recognized several faces. There in the background was a much younger Philip Mendoza, the prosecutor who had brought the case against Richard Morgan. And next to him, smiling broadly, was none other than Judge William Stevens, the current Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court. "This can't be a coincidence," Elizabeth murmured. "It gets worse," Beth said, pulling up another file. "I've been going through financial records. There's a pattern of shell companies and offshore accounts that all lead back to a single source. And guess who's at the center of it all?" The name on the screen made Elizabeth's blood run cold. Everett Holdings, LLC. "That's Judge Stevens' family company," Beth finished. "The same company that's been buying up failing businesses across the state for the past decade." Elizabeth sank into a chair, her mind racing. The implications were staggering. If this was true, it meant the corruption went far beyond what they had initially uncovered. It reached the very top of the judicial system. "We need to move fast," Elizabeth said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling Alex Morgan. He needs to know about this." Across town, in the penthouse of the Morgan building, Alex was having a heated discussion with his brother Richard. "You can't go public with this, Rich," Alex argued. "It's too dangerous. We don't know how deep this goes." Richard shook his head, frustration evident in his features. "We can't keep hiding, Alex. Dad sacrificed everything to expose this corruption. We owe it to him to finish what he started." Before Alex could respond, his phone buzzed. Seeing Judge Carter's name, he answered immediately. "Alex, we've found something. You and Richard need to come to Beth Anderson's apartment right away, and be careful. I think we're dealing with something much bigger than we initially thought." As the Morgan brothers made their way across the city, Philip Mendoza was facing his own crisis. In his office at the state attorney's building, he stared at the email on his screen with growing dread. "The Phoenix rises again. Prepare for Phase 2, hey deep. Wes." Mendoza's hands shook as he typed his reply. "It's too risky. The Morgans have too much evidence." The response came almost immediately. "Then we eliminate the risk by any means necessary." In a secure room deep within the Illinois Supreme Court building, Judge William Stevens ended the encrypted call and turned to the men gathered around him. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cold and authoritative, "we've come too far to let this fall apart now. The Phoenix Project has shaped this state's economy for 15 years. We will not let two brothers and an overzealous judge destroy everything we've built." One of the men, a silver-haired senator, leaned forward. "What's our play, Bill?" Stevens smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We have assets in place. By this time tomorrow, the Morgan brothers will be facing charges so severe, no one will believe a word they say. And as for Judge Carter," he paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Well, accidents happen." As night fell over Chicago, the pieces were moving into place for a showdown that would shake the foundations of the city's power structure. In Beth Anderson's apartment, Elizabeth Carter, the Morgan brothers, and Beth herself pored over the mountain of evidence they had gathered. "We need to get this to the FBI," Elizabeth said, organizing files into a secure drive. "This goes beyond state lines. It's federal now." Alex nodded, his face grim. "I'll make the call. I have a contact in the Chicago field office who owes me a favor." Richard, who had been quiet for the past hour, suddenly spoke up. "There's something else. Something Dad told me years ago, but I never understood until now." He pulled out an old, worn notebook from his jacket. He said if things ever got really bad, to look for the heart of the Phoenix. "I always thought it was just another of his metaphors, but—" Beth's eyes lit up. "Wait, the heart of the Phoenix? Richard, your family's old summer house. Wasn't it called Phoenix Point or something like that?" "Phoenix Cove," Richard corrected, realization dawning on his face. "Of course, Dad always said that house held more secrets than anyone knew." Elizabeth stood up, decision made. "We need to go there now. If your father left any final evidence, that's where it would be." As they prepared to leave, none of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, its occupants watching the apartment with cold, professional interest. In the SUV, a man spoke into a secure phone. "They're on the move. Looks like they're heading out of the city." Judge Stevens' voice crackled through the speaker. "Follow them, and remember, this is a cleanup operation, no loose ends." As the group left Beth's apartment, the stakes had never been higher. The truth about the Phoenix Project was finally within reach, but powerful forces were aligning to make sure it never saw the light of day. The drive to Phoenix Cove was tense, with Richard behind the wheel and the others scanning for any signs of pursuit. The Morgan family's summer house, once a place of childhood memories, now held the key to unraveling a decades-long conspiracy. "We're being followed," Alex said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Black SUV, 2 cars back." Elizabeth turned, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't carry. "Can you lose them?" Richard's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Hold on," he said, taking a sharp exit off the highway. The winding country roads were familiar to him from years of summers spent at Phoenix Cove. He navigated the turns with precision, the headlights of the SUV growing distant in the mirror. After several tense minutes of evasive driving, they finally lost their tail. The old Morgan summer house loomed before them, a grand Victorian structure silhouetted against the night sky. "It looks abandoned," Beth observed as they approached. "So it's been years since anyone's been here," Alex explained, leading the way to the front door. After the accident, neither of us could bring ourselves to come back. The lock was rusted, but Richard's old key still worked. As they stepped inside, The musty smell of disuse hit them. Sheets covered the furniture, and a thick layer of dust coated every surface. "Where do we start?" Elizabeth asked, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Richard moved towards the study, determination in his stride. Dad's office. If he left anything, it would be there. The study was a time capsule, frozen at the moment Edward Morgan had last used it. Books lined the walls, and a large oak desk dominated the center of the room. Richard approached it reverently, running his hand along its surface. "There has to be something," he muttered, beginning to search the drawers. As the others joined in the search, Beth's phone buzzed. She stepped out to take the call, returning moments later with a pale face. "That was my contact at the Chicago PD," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "There's been a break-in at my apartment. Everything's been ransacked." The implications hung heavy in the air. Their enemies were closing in. "We need to hurry," Elizabeth urged, redoubling her efforts. It was Alex who finally found something, hidden behind a false panel in one of the bookshelves. A small safe, its combination lock gleaming in the flashlight's beam. "Any ideas on the combination?" he asked, looking at Richard. Richard closed his eyes, thinking back to his childhood. "Try 7-15-62, he said after a moment. "It's the date Dad proposed to Mum." The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "To my sons," Richard read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and the Phoenix Project has come for our family. What's on this drive is the truth. Every name, every transaction, every dirty secret. Use it wisely, and remember, the truth is a flame that can never be extinguished. I love you both. Dad." As Alex plugged the drive into his laptop, the sound of tires on gravel outside made them all freeze. "They've found us," Elizabeth said, moving to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out several dark figures approaching the house. "We need to get out of here," Beth urged, but Richard shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "We stand our ground. It's time to end this, once and for all." Alex's laptop chimed, indicating the files had finished loading. What they saw made their jaws drop. It was all there. Detailed records of every aspect of the Phoenix Project, going back nearly 2 decades. Judge Stevens was at the center of it all, using his position to manipulate cases, bankrupt companies, and reshape the economic landscape of Illinois to benefit himself and his cronies. "This is it," Elizabeth breathed. "With this, we can bring down the entire corrupt system." The sound of the front door being kicked in echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps approached the study. "Whatever happens," Richard said, looking at his brother, "I'm glad we're in this together." Alex nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Just like Dad always wanted." As the door to the study burst open, Elizabeth Carter stood tall, facing the intruders with fierce determination. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "I am a federal judge, and you are interrupting a federal investigation. I suggest you lower your weapons and prepare to be arrested." For a moment, the armed men hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. In that moment of confusion, Alex hit send on his laptop, transmitting the entire contents of Edward Morgan's USB drive to multiple secure locations, including the FBI and several international news organizations. The truth was out. The Phoenix Project, in all its corrupt glory, was exposed to the world. And as sirens began to wail in the distance, Alex's FBI contact coming through just in time, the Morgan brothers shared a look of vindication. Their father's legacy was secure, and justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. In Chicago, Judge William Stevens's phone buzzed with an urgent news alert. As he read the headline, "Massive Judicial Corruption Scheme Exposed, Chief Justice Implicated," the color drained from his face. The Phoenix Project, his life's work, was crumbling around him. And as federal agents approached his office, he knew that the ashes of his ambition would give rise to a new era of justice, one that Edward Morgan had died fighting for. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The exposure of the Phoenix Project sent shockwaves through the Illinois judicial system and beyond. Federal investigations were launched, indictments were handed down, and the public demanded answers. Elizabeth Carter found herself at the center of a media storm, hailed as a hero for her role in uncovering the corruption. She used her newfound platform to push for sweeping reforms in the judicial system, determined to ensure that such a vast conspiracy could never take root again. Beth Anderson's series of articles on the Phoenix Project won her the Pulitzer Prize, catapulting her to the forefront of investigative journalism. Her detailed exposés laid bare the intricate web of corruption that had ensnared Illinois for so long. For the Morgan brothers, the vindication was bittersweet. Richard, finally exonerated of all charges, emerged from his ordeal with a renewed sense of purpose. He threw himself into rebuilding his company, this time with a focus on ethical business practices and corporate transparency. Alex, his years of secret-keeping finally over, found himself at a crossroads. The skills he had honed in his undercover work were in high demand, and he was offered a position with the FBI's white-collar crime division. After much soul-searching, he accepted, determined to use his insider knowledge to prevent future Phoenix projects from taking root. In a small ceremony at Phoenix Cove, now restored to its former glory, the Morgan brothers unveiled a memorial to their father. The simple plaque read, "Edward Morgan, a man who believed in truth, justice, and the power of perseverance." As summer turned to fall, Elizabeth Carter sat in her office, reviewing the final reports on the Phoenix Project case. The scope of the corruption had been even more vast than they had initially realized, reaching into other states and even brushing against federal agencies. The cleanup would take years, but the foundations for a more just system were being laid. Her phone buzzed with a message from Beth. "Turn on the news. It's happening." Switching on the television, Elizabeth watched as William Stevens, the former Chief Justice, was led out of the federal courthouse in handcuffs. His face, once the picture of judicial authority, now bore the haunted look of a man whose empire had crumbled to dust. As she watched, Elizabeth's mind wandered to a conversation she had had with Richard Morgan just days earlier. "What now?" she had asked him, as they stood looking out over the Chicago skyline from his office. Richard had smiled, a look of peace on his face that she had never seen before. "Now we build," he had said. "We build a system that lives up to the ideals my father believed in. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight. But it's what he would have wanted." Elizabeth turned off the TV, a sense of determination filling her. The exposure of the Phoenix Project wasn't an end, it was a beginning. A chance to remake the system, to restore faith in justice, and to ensure that the courage of people like Edward Morgan would never be forgotten. As she gathered her things to leave for the day, Elizabeth's eye caught the small plaque on her desk, a gift from the Morgan brothers. It bore a simple quote from Edward Morgan's journal. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Our job is to be the hands that help it bend." With those words in mind, Judge Elizabeth Carter stepped out of her office and into the future she had helped create, a future where truth and justice were more than just ideals, but living, breathing realities. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of the Phoenix Project's exposure continued to spread. State legislatures across the country began reviewing their judicial oversight processes, implementing stricter controls and transparency measures. The FBI, building on the evidence provided by the Morgans, launched a nationwide task force to root out similar schemes in other states. Richard Morgan, true to his word, transformed his company into a beacon of corporate responsibility. He established the Edward Morgan Foundation for Judicial Integrity, which worked to support whistleblowers and fund investigative journalism focused on government corruption. Alex Morgan quickly rose through the ranks of the FBI's white-collar crime division, his unique insights proving invaluable in complex cases. He often found himself working closely with Judge Carter, their shared experience during the Phoenix Project, having forged a strong professional bond. Beth Anderson's reporting didn't stop with the initial exposé. She dug deeper, uncovering connections between the Phoenix Project and other power brokers across the country. Her work sparked a renaissance in investigative journalism, inspiring a new generation of reporters to speak truth to power. One crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth Carter received an unexpected visitor in her chambers. Philip Mendoza, the former prosecutor who had been a key player in the Phoenix Project, stood before her, looking years older than when she had last seen him. "Judge Carter," he began, his voice hoarse, "I've come to make a full confession. There's still so much that hasn't come to light, and I can't carry this burden any longer." Elizabeth listened intently as Mendoza unraveled years of secrets, filling in gaps in their understanding of the Phoenix Project's operations. His testimony would prove crucial in the ongoing investigations, leading to dozens more indictments. As winter settled over Chicago, the city buzzed with the energy of renewal. The exposure of the Phoenix Project had shaken people's faith in institutions, but it had also awakened a powerful civic spirit. Citizens were more engaged than ever, demanding accountability from their leaders and actively participating in the process of reform. In the newly renovated offices of the Edward Morgan Foundation, Richard and Alex met with Elizabeth and Beth to discuss their next steps. The room was warm with the glow of achievement, but there was no sense of complacency. "We've won a major battle," Richard said, looking around at the faces of those who had become more than allies. They were family now, bonded by their shared fight for justice. But the war against corruption never really ends. "We need to stay vigilant," Beth nodded, pulling out her notebook. "I've been hearing whispers of something similar to the Phoenix Project brewing in California. It's not as advanced, but the patterns are there." "Then that's where we go next," Alex said, his FBI training kicking in as he started to formulate a plan. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know, when I first took on Richard's case, I never imagined it would lead us down this rabbit hole. But here we are, about to uncover what could be the biggest judicial conspiracy in American history." "It's not just judicial," Beth chimed in, her reporter's instincts buzzing. "This touches every sector: business, politics, law enforcement. The Phoenix Project isn't just about controlling the courts, it's about controlling everything." Richard nodded solemnly. "That's what our father realized." "And why they—" He trailed off, the pain of his father's accident still raw after all these years. Alex placed a comforting hand on his brother's shoulder. "We'll make this right, Richard. For Dad, for you, for everyone they've hurt." Elizabeth stood up, her determination evident. "All right, let's break this down. We need to secure that evidence from the caretaker's house before Mendoza's men get to it. Alex, can you handle that?" "Already on it," Alex replied, pulling out his phone to make some calls. "I've got some old bureau contacts who owe me favors. We'll have a team there within the hour." "Good," Elizabeth continued. "Beth, I need you to prepare a package of everything we have so far. Documents, recordings, photos, everything. We'll need multiple copies stored in secure locations." Beth nodded, her fingers already flying over her laptop keyboard. "I'll encrypt everything and set up dead man's switches. If anything happens to any of us, the whole story goes public instantly." "Smart," Richard commented, impressed by the young journalist's foresight. "What about me?" he asked, looking at Elizabeth. "I'm still technically in custody." The judge smiled. "Not for long. I'm calling an emergency hearing in 1 hour. With the new evidence we've uncovered, I have grounds to vacate your conviction pending a full investigation. You'll be a free man by dinner time, Richard." A wave of emotion washed over Richard's face. I don't know what to say. "Thank you, all of you." "Save the thanks for when this is all over," Alex said, his voice tinged with both determination and caution. "We're not out of the woods yet. Mendoza and whoever's really behind the Phoenix Project won't go down without a fight." As if on cue, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a text message. Her brow furrowed as she read it. "What is it?" Beth asked, noticing the judge's concern. "It's from my clerk," Elizabeth replied. "There's been a request filed to have me removed from the case due to conflict of interest. They're moving fast." "We need to move faster," Alex said decisively. "Judge, how quickly can you convene that hearing?" Elizabeth checked her watch. "If I pull some strings?" 30 minutes. "Do it," Richard urged. "The sooner we get this out in the open, the harder it will be for them to bury it again." As the group sprang into action, each focused on their tasks, Beth couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was the story of a lifetime, but it was also dangerous. People had already died to keep this secret. Outside the judge's chambers, the city of New York continued its usual bustle, unaware of the storm that was about to break. In offices, courtrooms, and boardrooms across the city, phones were ringing as word spread that something big was happening. In his opulent corner office, District Attorney Frank Mendoza stared out at the skyline, his usually confident demeanor shaken. The secure phone on his desk rang, displaying a number he both feared and respected. "Yes?" he answered, his voice carefully neutral. "You assured me this was handled," the voice on the other end said, cold and clipped. Mendoza swallowed hard. There were unforeseen complications. The Montgomerys were more prepared than we anticipated. Excuses, the voice spat. Fix this, Mendoza. Use whatever resources you need, but shut it down. Now. The line went dead, leaving Mendoza alone with the weight of what he had to do next. He picked up his regular phone, dialing a number he'd hoped never to use. It's me, he said when the other end picked up. Initiate Protocol Omega. No limits. As he hung up, Mendoza felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what Protocol Omega meant. There would be no going back from this. Back in Elizabeth's chambers, the team was working feverishly to prepare for the hearing. Alex had just gotten off the phone, a grim look on his face. My team secured the evidence at the caretaker's house, he reported. But they weren't the first ones there. There were signs of a struggle, and the caretaker is missing. Richard paled. Oh God, Johnson. He's been with our family for decades. We'll find him, Alex assured his brother, though his tone lacked conviction. Beth, who had been monitoring news feeds and social media, suddenly sat up straight. Guys, we've got a problem. Someone leaked Richard's pending release. There's a mob forming outside the courthouse. Elizabeth moved to the window, peering down at the street below. Sure enough, a crowd was gathering, their angry shouts just audible through the thick glass. They're trying to turn public opinion against us before we can even present our case, she muttered. It's not just that, Beth added, her eyes scanning rapidly across her screen. I'm seeing coordinated social media campaigns, sponsored content, even some legitimate news outlets pushing the narrative that this is all a conspiracy theory. Alex's jaw clenched. They're pulling out all the stops. We must be really close to something big. Richard, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly spoke up. The safe deposit box. All eyes turned to him. What safe deposit box? Elizabeth asked. Before he died, Dad told me about a safe deposit box. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should access it, but only if I was absolutely sure it was necessary. Richard's eyes met his brother's. I think it's necessary now, Alex. Alex nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Where is it? First National Bank, downtown branch. Box 1305. Elizabeth checked her watch again. We've got 15 minutes until the hearing. Alex, can you get to that box in time? I'll make it happen, he replied, already heading for the door. As Alex left, Beth's phone chimed with a news alert. Her face went ashen as she read it. What now? Richard asked, dreading the answer. Beth looked up, her voice shaking slightly. There's been an explosion at the First National Bank downtown. No details yet on casualties or damage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were no longer just uncovering a conspiracy. They were in the middle of a war. Elizabeth was the first to recover. Change of plans. We're not waiting for the hearing. We're going public now. She turned to Beth. Ms. Anderson, how quickly can you get everything we have on air? Beth's fingers were already flying across her keyboard. Give me 5 minutes to make some calls. We'll go live on every major network simultaneously. Do it, Elizabeth commanded. As Beth worked her media contacts, Richard approached Elizabeth, his face etched with concern. Judge Carter, he said softly. Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your career, your life, everything will change. Elizabeth met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. Mr. Montgomery, I swore an oath to uphold justice. If I back down now, that oath means nothing. We do this, and we do it now. Across the city, in various offices and homes, phones began to ring. Reporters scrambled for cameras, producers cleared airtime, and social media managers prepared for an onslaught of activity. In the DA's office, Frank Mendoza watched in horror as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. His phone rang again, the secure line. What the hell is happening, Mendoza? The voice demanded. For the first time in his career, Frank Mendoza had no answer. Back in Elizabeth's chambers, Beth gave a thumbs up. We'll live in 60 seconds. Elizabeth straightened her robes and took a deep breath. Richard stood beside her, a united front against the corruption they were about to expose. Ready? Beth asked, her finger hovering over the broadcast button. Elizabeth nodded. Let's make history. As the red light on Beth's laptop camera blinked on, signaling they were live across multiple networks, Elizabeth Carter began to speak. Good afternoon. I am Judge Elizabeth Carter of the New York Supreme Court. What I am about to share with you will shake the very foundations of our justice system. Across the city, state, and soon the entire nation, people stopped what they were doing to watch. In living rooms, offices, and on smartphones, millions tuned in to hear a story that would change everything. The Phoenix Project was about to be exposed, and the world would never be the same. As Judge Elizabeth Carter's voice resonated through screens across America, the atmosphere in her chambers was electric. Richard Montgomery stood beside her, his presence a testament to the injustice they were about to unveil. Beth Anderson, her journalistic instincts on high alert, monitored the live feed and incoming reactions. For years, Elizabeth continued, her voice steady and authoritative, a shadow organization known as the Phoenix Project has manipulated our judicial system, orchestrating the rise and fall of businesses and corrupting the very fabric of our democracy. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Today we stand before you with irrefutable evidence of this conspiracy. Evidence that not only exonerates Richard Montgomery, but implicates high-ranking officials in a scheme that goes far beyond simple corruption. As Elizabeth spoke, Beth's phone lit up with notifications. Social media was exploding, news tickers were being updated in real time, and journalists across the country were scrambling to verify and expand on the bombshell revelations. Meanwhile, across town, Alex Montgomery raced through the chaos surrounding the First National Bank. The explosion had been localized, designed to destroy specific safe deposit boxes rather than cause mass casualties. It was a precision strike, and Alex knew exactly what or who had been the target. Flashing his old FBI credentials, Alex pushed through the police cordon. "FBI, I need access to the vault immediately." A harried bank manager approached him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but the vault was the epicenter of the explosion. We can't allow anyone in until it's been cleared by the bomb squad." Alex's mind raced. He needed to get to that safe deposit box, but he also couldn't risk compromising potential evidence. He made a split-second decision. "I need your surveillance footage now. And I mean everything, internal, external, going back at least 48 hours. Back in Elizabeth's chambers, the judge was laying out the intricate web of the Phoenix Project, connecting dots that had long been obscured. "The project's reach extends to the highest levels of our government," she revealed, her words causing audible gasps from the off-camera crew. "We have evidence implicating Supreme Court justices, congressional leaders, and even members of the executive branch." Richard, seeing Elizabeth's subtle nod, stepped forward to speak. "My father, Edward Montgomery, discovered this conspiracy 15 years ago. He paid for that discovery with his life in what was made to look like an accident. I stand here today to finish what he started, to bring the truth to light." As Richard spoke, Beth noticed a sudden spike in online chatter. "Judge," she whispered urgently, "something's happening. There's a counter-narrative forming online, trying to discredit us in real time." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, but she didn't break her stride. They had anticipated this. "We are aware that there will be attempts to silence us, to discredit this information," she addressed the camera directly. "But the evidence we have is overwhelming and has been secured in multiple locations. Any attempt to suppress this truth will only result in its wider dissemination." Across the city, in the opulent offices of Titan Industries, CEO Marcus Blackwood watched the broadcast with growing alarm. He reached for his phone, dialing a number known to only a select few. "It's worse than we thought," he said without preamble. "Carter's going scorched earth. We need to activate all our media assets now." In newsrooms across the country, editors suddenly found themselves fielding calls from major advertisers, political operatives, and shadowy figures threatening everything from lawsuits to outright blackmail if they continued to air Judge Carter's revelations. But the genie was out of the bottle. For every network that caved to pressure, a dozen independent journalists and social media influencers picked up the story, spreading it far and wide. Alex, having secured the bank's surveillance footage, was now huddled in a nearby coffee shop, his laptop open as he scrubbed through video feeds. His trained eye caught something, a figure entering the bank just hours before the explosion, moving with purpose towards the safe deposit box area. He zoomed in, enhancing the image. His blood ran cold as he recognized the face. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." Without hesitation, he dialed Elizabeth's secure line. In the judge's chambers, Elizabeth's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, seeing Alex's name. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the camera, "we have breaking news from our ongoing investigation. I'm going to put this call on speaker," she answered, putting the phone on the desk. "Go ahead, Alex, you're live." Alex's voice, tense and urgent, filled the room. "Judge, I've ID'd the person who accessed Dad's safe deposit box just before the explosion. It's Senator William Hawthorne." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Senator Hawthorne, the respected elder statesman, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and a name often floated for a Supreme Court nomination. Elizabeth's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. Hawthorne's position, his influence over judicial appointments, his long-time friendship with Edward Montgomery. "Alex," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Positive," came the reply. "I'm sending you the footage now. It's him, clear as day." Beth, who had been monitoring online reactions, suddenly sat up straighter. "Judge, Senator Hawthorne is about to make a live statement from the Capitol." Elizabeth nodded grimly. "Put it up, split screen." The broadcast now showed Elizabeth and Richard on one side, and on the other, the distinguished figure of Senator William Hawthorne standing at a podium, the Capitol building looming behind him. "My fellow Americans," Hawthorne began, his voice carrying the weight of his years in public service, "I come before you today to address the shocking and baseless allegations being made by Judge Elizabeth Carter and Richard Montgomery." As Hawthorne spoke, denying any involvement and painting the Phoenix Project as a conspiracy theory, Elizabeth felt a mix of emotions: anger at the lies, sadness at the betrayal of public trust, but most of all a steely determination to see justice done. "Senator Hawthorne," she interrupted, knowing that her broadcast was likely being shown alongside his statement, "we have video evidence of you accessing Edward Montgomery's safe deposit box just hours before it was destroyed in an explosion. Would you care to explain that?" The senator's face, visible in the split screen, showed a momentary flicker of shock before he composed himself. "Judge Carter," he replied, his tone condescending, "I'm not sure what you think you've uncovered, but I can assure you—" "What we've uncovered, Senator," Richard interjected, his voice firm, "is the truth. The same truth that got my father killed 15 years ago. The truth about how the Phoenix Project has been manipulating our justice system, our economy, and our democracy for decades." As Richard spoke, Beth's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Judge," she whispered, "I'm receiving documents from anonymous sources, bank records, emails, transcripts of phone calls. It's a flood of evidence corroborating everything we're saying." Elizabeth nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. It seemed that their broadcast had inspired others to come forward, to finally speak out against the corruption they'd witnessed. "Senator Hawthorne," Elizabeth addressed the split screen again, "we are prepared to release evidence that not only places you at the scene of today's explosion, but also links you directly to the death of Edward Montgomery 15 years ago. Do you still wish to deny your involvement?" The senator's facade began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes darted off camera, presumably seeking guidance from unseen advisors. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," he stammered. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate forum." "The appropriate forum is right here, right now," Elizabeth declared. "The American people deserve the truth, Senator. And they're going to get it." As if on cue, Alex's voice came through the speakerphone again. "Judge, I've got more. The bank's external cameras caught the bomber leaving the scene. You're not going to believe who it is." The room held its breath as Alex sent through the image. When it appeared on Beth's screen, she gasped audibly. "It's Martin Sullivan," Beth said, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Elizabeth Carter leaned in to look at the screen, her eyes widening in disbelief. Martin Sullivan was one of the most respected judges on the appellate court. He had been a mentor to Elizabeth early in her career and was widely considered to be on the shortlist for the next Supreme Court nomination. "This can't be right," Elizabeth said, shaking her head. "Martin Sullivan? He's been a pillar of the judicial community for decades." Richard Blackstone, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Judge Carter, if I may, this actually makes a disturbing amount of sense. Sullivan has been in a position to influence key decisions for years. If he's part of this conspiracy, it explains how they've managed to manipulate the system so effectively." Beth was furiously typing on her laptop. I'm cross-referencing Sullivan's case history with the companies we know were targeted by Project Phoenix. There's a pattern here. Every time one of these companies faced legal trouble, Sullivan was involved in some capacity, either directly overseeing the case or influencing the judge who was. Alex's voice crackled through the speaker again. Judge, there's more. We've traced the funds used to purchase the materials for the bomb. They lead back to an offshore account linked to a shell company. Guess who's on the board of directors? Let me guess, Elizabeth said grimly. Martin Sullivan. Bingo, Alex confirmed. And he's not alone. There are several other names on that list that you're going to want to see. As Alex began to list the names, Richard's face grew increasingly pale. These were some of the most powerful people in the country. CEOs, politicians, and even a few names he recognized from the international business world. This is bigger than we thought, Richard said, his voice hoarse. It's not just about controlling businesses or manipulating the justice system. This is about power on a global scale. Elizabeth stood up, her decision made. Beth, I need you to get this information to every major news outlet you trust. Use your secure channels. Alex, coordinate with the FBI and prepare for multiple high-profile arrests. We need to move fast before they realize we're onto them. She turned to Richard. Mr. Blackstone, I owe you an apology. It's clear now that you were a scapegoat in a much larger scheme. I'm officially vacating your conviction, effective immediately. Richard nodded, still processing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Thank you, Judge. But what happens now? These people won't go down without a fight. No, they won't, Elizabeth agreed, which is why we need to be smart about this. Beth, in addition to the news outlets, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report. Every detail, every connection, every piece of evidence we have, we'll release it to the public the moment the arrests begin. Transparency is our best weapon against corruption. Beth nodded, already reaching for her phone to set things in motion. I'll have my team work around the clock. We'll be ready. Alex's voice came through once more. Judge, I've just received word from my superiors. They've green-lit the operation. We can move as soon as you give the word. Elizabeth took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Do it, Alex, and be careful. These people are powerful and desperate. They won't hesitate to fight back. As Alex signed off to coordinate the arrests, Elizabeth turned to face the window, looking out over the city she had sworn to protect and serve. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the urban landscape. It felt symbolic somehow, the end of an era of corruption and the dawning of a new age of justice. Beth, she said, not turning around, when this is all over, I think it's time I considered retirement. The system needs new blood, people who haven't been tainted by years of compromise and looking the other way. Beth looked up from her furious typing, surprise evident on her face. But Judge, you're one of the good ones. We need people like you more than ever. Elizabeth turned back, a sad smile on her face. Maybe. But I think I can do more good by stepping aside and making way for the next generation. People like you, Beth. People who aren't afraid to dig for the truth, no matter where it leads. Richard, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. If I may, Judge Carter, when this is over, I'd like to use my resources to establish a foundation. One dedicated to promoting transparency in the justice system and supporting investigative journalism. Perhaps you'd consider being involved. Elizabeth's smile grew warmer. Mr. Blackstone, I think that's an excellent idea. It seems we both have a chance at redemption. As the room fell into a contemplative silence, each person lost in their own thoughts about the monumental task ahead, Beth's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her eyes widening. It's from Alex, she said, her voice tense. The arrests have begun, but there's a problem. Sullivan is gone. His house is empty and there's evidence that he left in a hurry. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. He must have been tipped off. We need to find him before he can disappear completely or alert the others. Richard leaned forward, a determined look in his eyes. I think I might be able to help with that. In my years of dealing with these people, I learned a thing or two about their escape routes and safe houses. If Sullivan is running, I have a good idea where he might go. Elizabeth nodded. All right, Mr. Blackstone. It seems you have one more role to play in this drama. Let's end this once and for all. As they began to formulate a plan to track down Sullivan, the city outside continued its daily rhythm, unaware that the foundations of power were shifting beneath its feet. The next few hours would determine the future of not just their city, but potentially the entire nation. The truth was finally coming to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night air was crisp, as Richard Blackstone's private jet touched down on a small unmarked airstrip just outside of Washington, D.C. As they taxied to a stop, Richard turned to Judge Elizabeth Carter, seated across from him. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "It's not too late to let the FBI handle it." Elizabeth's eyes were steely with determination. "We've come too far to back down now, Mr. Blackstone. If your intel is correct, and Sullivan is hiding out at this private compound, we need to confront him ourselves. The moment official channels get involved, there's a risk of more leaks." Beth Anderson, furiously typing away on her laptop, looked up. "I've just received confirmation from Alex. The other arrests are proceeding as planned, but they're meeting resistance. Several of the targets seem to have been prepared for this." Richard nodded grimly. "All the more reason to get to Sullivan quickly. He's the linchpin. If we can get him to talk, the whole network could unravel." As they disembarked from the plane, a nondescript SUV was waiting for them. The driver, a stern-faced man Richard introduced as former Special Forces, nodded curtly as they climbed in. The drive was tense and silent, each occupant lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. After about an hour, they turned off the main road onto a narrow, tree-lined drive. "We're here," Richard said quietly. "The compound should be just ahead." As they crested a small hill, a sprawling estate came into view. High walls surrounded the property, with security cameras visible at regular intervals. "How do we get in?" Beth whispered, her journalistic instincts already cataloging every detail. Richard pulled out a small device from his pocket. "This is why we needed to come ourselves. I've had this for years, a universal key fob that can mimic any entry code used by members of the Phoenix Project. I never thought I'd actually use it." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "And you're just mentioning this now?" Richard had the grace to look sheepish. "I wasn't sure it would still work. But if Sullivan is as panicked as we think he is, he might not have changed the codes yet." As they approached the main gate, Richard pointed the device at the security panel. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft beep, the gate began to slide open. "I'll be damned," Beth muttered. They drove through slowly, acutely aware that they were now in the lion's den. The main house loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. "There," Elizabeth said suddenly, pointing to a faint light visible in one of the upper windows. "Someone's home." Richard parked the SUV in the shadow of a large oak tree, and they quietly made their way to the house. The front door was locked, but Richard's device worked its magic once again. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. They moved cautiously through the opulent rooms, making their way towards the stairs. As they reached the second floor, they heard a muffled voice coming from behind a closed door. Elizabeth held up a hand, signaling them to stop. They could just make out the words, "I don't care what it takes, I need a way out of the country now. They're closing in, and I won't be the one left holding the bag." Richard and Elizabeth exchanged a look. It was Sullivan, and he was clearly desperate. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth stepped forward and threw open the door. Martin Sullivan, former respected judge and apparent mastermind of a vast conspiracy, stood frozen by the window, phone still held to his ear. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sullivan's face contorted with rage. "You!" he spat, glaring at Richard. "You miserable traitor! Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard stood his ground. "I've done what I should have done years ago, Martin. It's over." Sullivan's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route, but Elizabeth blocked the doorway, her presence commanding even without her judicial robes. "Martin Sullivan," she said, her voice steady, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and a list of charges so long it would take all night to read them. Surrender yourself now." For a brief moment, it looked like Sullivan might try to fight or run, but then, as if all the fight suddenly left him, his shoulders sagged. "You don't understand," he said, his voice suddenly old and tired. "None of you understand. We were trying to bring order to chaos. The system was broken. We were fixing it." Beth, who had been recording everything on her phone, stepped forward. "By manipulating the courts? By forcing companies into bankruptcy? By bombing a bank to cover your tracks? That's not fixing anything, Your Honor. That's just corruption with a fancy name." Sullivan sank into a nearby chair, the weight of his actions finally seeming to hit him. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he mumbled. "We had such high ideals in the beginning." As if on cue, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the second. Elizabeth turned to Richard and Beth. "You two should go. The FBI will be here any moment, and it's better if you're not caught up in this part." Richard hesitated. "Are you sure? We can stay. Testify to what we've seen." Elizabeth shook her head. "You've done more than enough, both of you. Let me handle this last part. Go. Make sure the truth gets out." That's the most important thing now. As Richard and Beth reluctantly made their way out of the house, Elizabeth turned back to Sullivan. The man who had once been her mentor now looked small and defeated. "For what it's worth, Martin," she said softly, "I wish it hadn't come to this." Sullivan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and defiance. "One day, Elizabeth, you'll understand. The world isn't black and white. Sometimes to uphold justice, you have to work outside the system." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "No, Martin, that's where you're wrong. The moment we start believing we're above the law is the moment we lose everything we're supposed to stand for." As the FBI agents burst into the room, Elizabeth stepped aside, watching as they handcuffed the man who had once been one of the most respected figures in the judicial system. It was a sobering reminder of how far even the mighty could fall. Outside, Richard and Beth watched from the safety of the trees as Sullivan was led out of the house in handcuffs, surrounded by FBI agents. The night sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking on the horizon. "What happens now?" Beth asked, her voice quiet. Richard turned to her, a determined look in his eyes. Now we make sure this never happens again. We shine a light so bright on the system that no shadow of corruption can survive." As they made their way back to the SUV, both knew that this was not the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. The truth had been revealed, but the real work of rebuilding trust in the justice system was just beginning. In the coming days, weeks, and months, the full extent of the Phoenix Project would be revealed to a shocked nation. Beth's comprehensive report, published simultaneously across multiple platforms, would spark a national conversation about judicial integrity and corporate influence. Richard, true to his word, would establish the Blackstone Foundation for Judicial Transparency, with Elizabeth Carter as its first chairperson. Together, they would work tirelessly to implement reforms and safeguards to prevent such widespread corruption from ever taking root again. And in courtrooms and newsrooms across the country, a new generation of judges, lawyers, and journalists, inspired by the courage of those who had exposed the truth, would pick up the mantle, committed to upholding the true spirit of justice. The Phoenix Project, born in secrecy and corruption, had ultimately led to its own destruction. But from its ashes, a new era of transparency and accountability would rise, promising a brighter, more just future for all.